let's go ahead and do a roll call. Who's
Okay,
here?
first I need to read your electronic statement. This meeting is being held as an electronic meeting pursuant to and in compliance with the City of Richmond Ordinance 2020-093 and the school board's resolution that was approved on April 20th, 2020. The notice of the meeting did indicate that the meeting would be live streamed on your Facebook page, and the link was provided. And the agenda for the meeting was also posted to Board Docs, and the link was provided for that. And so your roll call, give me 1 minute. And if I miss any committee members, please let me know. Mr. Young,
Present.
Ms. Dorr, Mr. Barlow, Mrs. Burke,
Yes.
Mr. Williams, Ms. Corliss,
Yes, present.
Mr. Rumrill.
Here.
Did I miss any committee members, Mr. Young?
I don't see Steve Pancham on the call.
Okay.
And Paul McClellan is here. I just fixed my audio. Can y'all hear me?
Thank you.
So it looks like for the moment we're short as it relates to a quorum, so we can't yet approve the minutes, but everyone should be in receipt of said minutes. Are there any questions relevant to the minutes from the last meeting and/or recommendations? Any edits? No. Then with that said, I would like to introduce Mr. Paul McClellan. Paul was kind enough to join us this evening. Everyone in the call will recall that we've had some conversation about augmenting our partnership and collaboration with the city. And the mayor's office was so kind to think about who would be just that right person, that individual with the experience and expertise to speak to what the city is doing on their side in regards to real estate. So I would like for us to welcome Mr. Paul McClellan. He will provide a little more introduction to who he is, but he is representative of the City of Richmond, specifically Department of Economic Development, and is responsible for real estate there too. Paul, welcome, my friend. And if you could share a little bit about who you are, and then for the benefit of the committee, Paul will then provide some context pertinent to the city's biennial real estate plan. Paul.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction, Jonathan. Again, I'm Paul McClellan, and my official title is Community and Economic Development Administrator. I was formerly, until some HR title changes, I was the Programs Administrator for Real Estate Strategies for the Department of Economic Development. And I've been with the city for about 9 years now in that role. And basically, I've been managing all the city's real estate transactions, doing all the detailed work in terms of negotiating leases, property acquisitions, negotiating the sale of surplus property, and then working on strategies for disposing of city-owned property. And that's I'm a one-man show right now with no staff, so I get pulled 1,000 different ways every day. But I just wanted to share that bit with you. I have over 30 years of experience in architectural design, real estate project management, and negotiations of all types of real estate transactions, from leases to acquisitions to property sales and disposition. I spent about 5 years working in corporate real estate for Ethel Corporation. I've spent 15 years in retail real estate for Circuit City, including doing some of their Carmack stores. And then I was with the State Division of Real Estate Services for about 2 years before joining the city in 2011.
Well, Paul, you are clearly the right person for the job, and again, for the benefit of the committee, because vacant property committee was created by the school board, and a provision included the appointment of individuals. We'll need to have the full school board officially welcome Paul, and provide an opportunity for him to join in a more formal way. But in the interim, we welcome you this evening, Paul. And with that said, if you'd be so kind to provide a little bit of information about where the city is at, speak to the city's real estate plan, and perhaps in the context of what we're trying to do, Richmond Public Schools.
Okay, great. Just for a little background information, the way I believe you've probably seen the copy that I distributed of the biennial real estate strategies plan that we developed for 2020. That requirement came because of a city code change in late 2017, where the city council approved a code change, and that required us to submit, the CAO to submit a biennial real estate strategies plan by October 1st of every even numbered years. And it's a 2-year plan where we list a list of properties that we're going to focus on the sale of over the next 2 years. And for the 2020 real estate strategies plan, I worked with Sharon Ebert, the DCA, over our whole group for planning and economic development, and Matt Welch, who is our senior policy advisor in our office. And we scrubbed and looked at over 800 city-owned properties that we own, including school board surplus properties that, and from those, we developed a list with a particular goal of providing much needed affordable housing in this city at this time. We feel like we haven't focused on that as much in the past, and we really want to put a laser focus on the true need from our city residents for affordable housing. So with that in mind, we created a list of properties for this strategy that is divided into 3 categories. The entire list that we submitted to, presented to City Council on the 28th of September, the entire list was 77 parcels of real estate totaling about 147.8 acres. And they're divided in the following 3 categories. The first category is 36 parcels that total about 17 acres. And those parcels all have potential. They're smaller lots that have potential for future home ownership units. And it's an opportunity to facilitate affordable home ownership in coordination with the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust and other nonprofit affordable housing organizations. And our most likely way of disposing of those smaller lots is by direct conveyance to the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust for development. The second category of parcels is 24 parcels that are spread over 11 different development sites, because some development sites have multiple parcels. They total, in that category 2, they could total about 45 acres. And those parcels and assemblages of parcels have the potential for future affordable multifamily rental units, housing units. Most likely, those properties will be sold or disposed of by request for proposals, unless they're otherwise noted on the list. And then category 3 contains 17 parcels that are spread over 6 different development sites, and they total about 84 acres. And they are parcels that with potential for future large-scale mixed-use development and mixed-income housing development. Most likely, the disposition method for all of those is going to be by request for proposals. And that's a broad summary of the plan. I did want to point out that we do have 3 school sites on that real estate strategy. One of them is the old Oak Grove School, which the school board transferred to the city back in January of 2018. And that property has a potential for mixed use or mixed income housing on it, being a large site around 5 acres. The other school properties are the Moore Street School at 1113 Moore Street. And that parcel is, we're saying we would sell it only subject to the city and the school board agreeing on a subdivision boundary, because that is a very sensitive site. We understand that. And we want to come to some agreement with the school board and the city of where the appropriate boundary is drawn for that, creating a separate parcel that we could sell. And that property, I know we've toured some different groups through it. There was some interest in a daycare. It's been talked about maybe for affordable housing for teachers or something like that. So there are different ways to look at this. When we say affordable housing, we could possibly target certain groups if we want to, or certain professions. You know, I think there's different ways we can look at it when we craft an RFP ultimately to sell the property. The other school site we have on the list is the 13-acre site, and that's the historic residence. It's about 5,000 square feet that stands alone on Brook Road. And that property, again, has the same issue as the Moore Street School in that it needs to be subdivided out, the parcel does, from the overall school site. And we would need to reach an agreement between the school board and the city on where that subdivision boundary is occurring.
And Paul, if I may interrupt you just for a moment, for everyone on the call, Paul, correct me, all those properties are in your category 2. If I'm reading the report correctly, that's
right.
The multifamily rental. That's the
right. And those are general categories. What will happen, I wanted to explain the overall sale process too. Just because we put them on this list doesn't mean we can just go out and sell them. We have to, for any of these parcels on this entire list, there will have to be an ordinance taken to council to actually allow the property be conveyed to someone else. So there's a whole another set round of review that would have to happen with these. And a further step is when we have to do an RFP, or request for proposals. Back in 2017, the code amendment that happened also requires that we take the RFP document to the Land Use and Housing and Transportation Committee of Council, and they approve the evaluation criteria in that RFP. So if the council wants to, they could indicate, based on neighborhood concerns or whatever, a preference for a certain type of use, they could add some conditions in there. So there's some flexibility on how that RFP is crafted in terms of what kind of criteria we're going to use to evaluate the proposals that we get. And we understand totally that particularly these school sites, these two that are connected to the existing schools, are particularly sensitive. So we definitely want to get your input on what kind of uses would be acceptable on that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, Paul. And all three sites have been at the risk of stating the obvious, a topic of conversation in this committee and in the community at large. And in fact, we had on the agenda some discussion this evening pertinent to Moore Street. So it's perhaps a perfect segue in a moment to a cursory discussion relevant to Moore Street. But if I may, I have a couple questions for you, but I want to open it up to the committee. What questions do you have? And please feel free to jump in. What questions do we have for Paul? Any questions for Paul? Well, Paul, the obvious question then regards, so yes, over at Linwood Holton and then at Carver, it looks like the school board, we have some work to do in regards to defining what kind of uses that we have in mind, or what we are comfortable with. I think is how you described at those sites. But on your end, on the city's end, I mean, what can we do? What can RPS do to expedite all three of those properties so that the city's prepared to put an RFP out on the street?
Well, I think particularly the Moore Street School and the 13-acre site, the Linwood Holton site, finding out who we should be dealing with administratively with RPS to negotiate that. I don't know if it would be Bobby Hathaway and the school principal on that site. I don't know who from RPS we should be negotiating this with, or taking a first shot at trying to define the boundary lines on this.
Okay, that's helpful. I suspect folks on this committee may propose that it's this group here. So,
or if it's this group, yeah. I just need some directions.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're in the right place, my friend. I saw Cheryl, my colleague Cheryl Burke, had a comment. Ms. Burke. Cheryl, you there?
Sorry, I was on mute. All right, forgive me. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Jonathan. Paul, I'm glad that you're with us this evening. Thank you for sharing that pertinent information. We spent a lot of time last school year looking at the Moore Street, which I know you're familiar with this project.
Right.
Because we thought we had a partnership in place. It bothers me greatly that that building sits so close to Carver Elementary. I remember years ago, there was talk of destroying the building, demolishing the building, and it was changed because it was found to be historic or whatever. And it's still sitting there. And it's not a good setting for our children. It's not a good setting for any community within the city of Richmond. So my question is regarding that school, Moore Street, maybe that's where we start. Oak Grove, Belmead, half filled with water. Is Bobby Hathaway on the phone, on the call? He can share that with us. 13 acres, which I always thought was such a beautiful site. And even though it's right in the playground area of Holton, it's still a little distance there. Mm-hmm. What can we do? I don't want us to take another whole year. But that's just how I feel about approaching things. That's why I'm glad that you're here and you've been appointed. You sound like you're the man to lead us in this. Michelle Hadasco is on the line right now. There she is. So the right people are on Zoom. What can we do? Jonathan, I don't know whether it would be a subcommittee, but I want for us to move as quickly as we possibly can in terms of having a plan. Otherwise, forgive me, we continue to talk about it. We continue to plan it. Jonathan, 4 years from now, I don't want to have the same conversation. So, so far as the RFPs are concerned or whatever else, we know we need to do something. So what can we do between now and the next 2 months to get the ball rolling along the lines of whom we need to contact, where we're going to get the money, or who's going to provide what through the RFP? What's the framework, as you stated, Jonathan? What's the framework for us to boom, boom, boom? I mean, we keep walking, we keep talking, we keep looking. Let's make it happen.
I understand the concern, I really do, because I've been in on those conversations and I've been in on those tours multiple times, and the question always comes back, how are we going to divide this up? And we don't get an answer, but I'm willing to take a shot at submitting a plan marked up where I think it should go. We may want to get city zoning to weigh in on different types of uses, how much parking would be required on it. And there's some of those things need to be researched, I think, for us to come up with a recommendation on where that boundary line should be drawn.
So when you provide,
Paul,
I think that's wonderful. Jonathan, if I may, I think that's perfect.
Yeah.
So we also will have a time frame within that as well, you think? I think that's where we lost some time per se with Moore Street. It wasn't anybody's fault. Just that the city was going one way, VCU was going another way, we were going another way. So we've learned from that.
Right.
And Michelle is ready to move forward. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, please.
I'm sorry if I had missed this. I think something that could also just be helpful, and then maybe can also help us kind of create a roadmap, is you mentioned a couple of the parcels. Is it possible to prioritize one? So maybe we are saying Moore Street, to Cheryl's point, take that one, kind of learn the process, and then rinse and repeat for some of these other properties. Does the committee have any thoughts around prioritizing one, either because it seems the simplest or because perhaps it works better in the city's bigger plan for some of the other housing usage? Any thoughts on that? Just curious how the different properties sit in terms of broader interest.
I want Paul to address that, but Michelle, that's a terrific question, and it's something that the committee has deliberated on, just how we prioritize the properties and how we divide and conquer. But to Cheryl's point, we don't want to be talking about this forever, but instead want to get to the point where we've got, these 3 properties here require this, RFP process. So yeah, Paul, what any thoughts as it relates to, and what you referenced your one man show. God bless you. What is your bandwidth and the city's bandwidth? Does it make sense? It seems to me it would, to Michelle's point, to take one of these properties, start with that, and Steve?
I do think it would make sense to prioritize them and start with the one you feel is the most urgent. Offhand, I sense that Moore Street School is probably the most urgent. It's also the most complicated one to solve, but it's been that way for so long. I would say it's the most urgent. If y'all agree with that?
Yeah, and
real quickly, if I may, I just want to point out your point, though, is also, I think, very well taken, that we've already been embroiled in quite a bit of politics about the Moore Street over the last year. And so there could actually be value in picking the most non-contentious site to build out a roadmap that nobody's talking about, nobody really cares about, just to learn the process, so that when we get to ones that have more complexity, more politics, more interest, different people vying for it, the foundational stuff comes easy to us and we can layer on. So in some ways that would be prioritizing and then picking your lowest priority, which might seem counterintuitive, but could be another approach. I'll end there. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good, Michelle. And Janelle, Lily had a question.
Hi, everyone. Paul, nice to see you again. We worked together some time ago. It's been a while back. So thank you for all of your explanation. It's great to hear the process, but I do want to ask, I guess, any guidance on, we'll take Moore Street, we'll take some other properties who have had, the school board has had particular individuals or groups express interest in these parcels. You mentioned that there would be an RFP process and all of those types of steps that need to happen. So what would your guidance be on, for whatever the property is, regardless, outside of these 3 even, of if folks approach the schools and want to ultimately or showing interest in those properties, I would imagine, because there's an RFP process, the schools should not be engaging in elaborate conversations, et cetera, and all of that. Could you kind of give us guidance on how we navigate that?
Well, I think I think I need to wade into the weeds for a minute, just in terms of the property control, because until basically the school board has a right to operate a property for school purposes, whatever school functions, school purposes. But when you surplus it, my understanding is the requirement is the school board is supposed to provide a deed and provide the property, convey the property, all the property rights back to us, basically. And we can't sell a property until we have all of those property rights conveyed back to us. Correct. So that's one step that has to happen. So with Moore Street School and with 13 acres, I believe y'all have declared them surplus and closed them. So but they've never been conveyed to the city by deed. And it's because of that inability to agree on a final boundary to subdivide it. So that's a first step. In order to do those, we've got to get them transferred back totally to us, all the property rights.
Right. I guess the question I guess more specifically is, given that, I won't go into, anyway, given that is the established process. Once that is done, right?
Right.
How far should RPS weigh into, or the board weigh into entertaining proposals, or if you will, for these properties? If ultimately the school board will have to relinquish it to sell, for you all to sell it or dispose of it in some other way, if there is an RFP process established for you all, for the city to do that, how far, I guess that's the question, how far should we go into establishing some type of conversation with potential partners or grantees of this property?
There's just the interested parties who would like to acquire the property who come to you.
Right.
Yeah, I think it would be best if you directed them to me, so I'm keeping a running tally of those, so that when we do an RFP, we have all those contacts. That's what I've typically done over the years on properties where we get inquiries. And you may have a list already just from the years you've been dealing with people. And if you could share that with me, then when we get ready to do the RFP, we will typically advertise it as a public notice in the newspapers and the Richmond Free Press and the Times Dispatch. And but we can also email it to parties who've been interested in it before, just to say, give them a heads up that we're issuing an RFP.
Yeah, it does seem, I'm curious if anyone else would weigh in on this. It does seem arguably a little bit like a chicken or egg, right? I mean, so the school board has to identify what its comfort level is with uses, particularly those two properties, and what the boundaries can look like, both physical and other kind of boundaries, before we enter into RFP, but to enter, or rather to execute some RFP, put it out there in the street. But to do that, it's a little bit of a chicken or egg, or it seems.
Well, I think we can agree on the boundaries for sure and get the transfer in the works. We could even possibly draft an RFP for y'all to look at and get your input on the evaluation criteria on that. And maybe there's a use that you were saying you don't want on there, and we can serve that up. I can review that with the administration and express those concerns if you have concerns about the specific items that are on that evaluation criteria. We have a standard evaluation criteria, which is just a basic RFP criteria for any generic real estate, like the price of the property, the effect on the neighborhood, the experience of the developer. There's like 6 items that we have that's written in code, but we have the ability to add items in that evaluation criteria. Like you could say, we would give a preference for affordable housing for teachers, or we would give a preference for a daycare center. So there's ways of couching those evaluation criteria, or creating those extra items in the evaluation criteria that can influence what the use is.
Paul, and I saw Amelia had a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering if the city has the flexibility to use like a PPEA or PPTA process to receive unsolicited bids and then evaluate.
You're talking about the state's process?
Yes.
Yeah, I've never heard us use that process, because I don't think offhand the code allows us to use that exact process.
Okay. I was trying to think of a way to kind of streamline the RFP process where possible.
Well, like I was saying, City Council just added that requirement that it go to Land Use Committee for approval.
Right.
And the one that we've taken through there took many months to get it approved. So we just have finally sold the old Bainbridge Fire Station at 2901 Bainbridge, old Fire Station 17.
Are any other questions for Paul or pertinent to city's process, a biennial real estate plan? Paul, we're going to come back. We're going to come back to the subject before we adjourn and consider next steps and prioritization. But are there any questions, comments, feedback now for this part of the discussion?
Jonathan, I have one question, and I just don't
Yes, ma'am.
recall. What, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Wickham, does that belong to the city, or that belongs to, or we still have that? Where the school was torn down in the East End. We don't have that anymore. The city owns that
I
property.
believe we own it. I believe it did get transferred. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, all right. I was just wondering about other places. I know the lights are still there. The poles are still there, even though it's grown up a lot. It just doesn't look good, but I know that it was built on a landfill similar to Norrell, supposedly.
Right.
So
One side of it is over the landfill. The sloped side is, yeah.
just doesn't look well.
Yes.
Doesn't look well at all. That's
And the
not
wi-
your fault, but I'm just saying
I know that there's been some talk about putting some additional city functions on that site. So that's been talked about in the last year. I need to see where that stands. So.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Then next on the agenda, we had the discussion pertinent to Moore Street, but I think we adequately addressed that subject. Are there any questions? We had, folks will recall, we met over there at Moore Street earlier in the year and had that was, I think, probably in February, right before everything happened. We had discussion about the VCU, but now looks like that's unlikely to happen. Are there any questions or comments about Moore Street that we haven't already addressed in Paul's remarks?
Jonathan,
Then, yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to say, obviously, this Moore Street School has been kicked around for a long time. I have about 2 inches of research and that was done for the reuse of this school back in November of 2005 and revisited in January of 06. And it actually shows property lines and proposed property lines if the building was going to be sold off. It has all kinds of current elevations and proposed elevations if we were going to reuse the school. Quite a bit of work has gone into this.
Right.
I don't
And
know
I
if
agree that we could
everybody
use.
has a copy of this.
I have a copy of that, yeah. So we can use that as somewhat as a guide, but it depends on the use we put on the site and how much parking it needs, what the uses were envisioned. So if it's a nonprofit office, if it's a daycare, it may generate different parking requirements and land use needs. The daycare might need outdoor play area. You know, there's different things. So we've got to look and consider when we're crafting the RFP and the dividing line.
And Deborah, while you've got the floor, I know that you are working tirelessly over there at Carver along with folks like Jerome Legions, among others, and understand that the team is putting a lot of effort into constructing a gymnasium. The building, Carver doesn't currently have one. Do you want to take a minute or two just to provide some information in the context of the Moore Street building?
Well, this is really Jerome's thing to talk about, so I feel like I'm stepping on his toes even though he's not here. But he has worked really diligently with Michael Hallmark, I believe his name is. They abut properties, and he has spent quite a good deal of time with Michael trying to assess how we could build a gymnasium for Carver using empty, what do you call them?
Cargo containers.
Cargo,
Great.
yeah, thanks.
Oh, okay.
The cargo, and Michael had actually put together a proposal of how it would look, being able to collect rainwater. I mean, it's really a neat idea. And it's something that I think that if we used it there, put it up there and found out what kind of costs, I think that there are other schools that don't have gymnasiums that might be able to utilize this as well. It seemed pretty unique and it seemed interesting. And as I say, I think it's something that once we got one done, we could probably replicate it.
Right. Sounds very interesting.
I don't have the pictures with me, but he actually got to the point of creating some graphics. And I can't, was it about 15 of those containers, Bobby? I think it was around 15 of those containers, and they run someplace like around $4,000 a piece. Now, obviously there's more to it than just that, but it was an interesting concept, and could provide those children with some, much needed resources over there.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. That's really exciting. Thanks for everything that you and Jerome and Michael and everyone is doing. Tawana Giles, I mean, it's extraordinary what's being done at Carver.
Is there a concept plan for how that gymnasium would fit on the site of any kind? Just because that would help us with evaluating the Moore Street School subject.
So when Michael did that conceptual drawing, it was at the back side of the current Carver School, so it would sit just in front of Moore Street on the inside playground side.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Just as a quick comment, Scott Barlow had been leading that in terms of advocacy, and I actually emailed him about it twice over the last month, but given the news he shared about his partner's health last night, I'm sure that's why I had not heard back from him. Because what I had asked was with his transition, if he was, I think we need board advocacy to kind of move that forward, just given it's a specific school outside of the kind of broader facilities context. So I'm not sure if that's something that Mariah White is going to, we'll need to connect with her on that, or if Jonathan, that's something you want to connect with Scott about to learn just a little bit more about the vision. But Bobby and I met with those designers once or twice and certainly saw some plans, but we're in a bit of a holding pattern in terms of moving anything forward.
Yeah, that's thanks, Michelle. That's really helpful. And I know that there's a virtual meeting coming up on that. So I think, Paul, if you're available and if they're amenable, I think it would be really relevant for you to participate. But I don't want to speak for the organizers of the meeting. But thank you all for that. I'd like to, because we're at 6:40, transition to the next part of the agenda, which I'm really excited about, and I hope will provide some additional clarity around what we've just been discussing the last 20 or 30 minutes, and specifically. We've invited 3 outstanding individuals who have extraordinary experience to include right here in the city of Richmond. They're going to provide, I asked them if they'd be willing to prognosticate in regards to next year, 2021, where they see the market going. And in the context of our buildings, of our infrastructure, and what that could mean for identifying the highest and best use. First, ladies first, we'll begin with Amelia Wehunt, who I've probably known for Amelia over a decade, I think. Real advocate for us.
You can just keep it at
that. You're amazing and always modest. Amelia is representing Timmons Group this evening. Up next is Jason. Jason, I don't want to mispronounce your last name. Remind me how to pronounce it.
Gio.
Gio. Jason Gio has an extraordinary portfolio that he's responsible for here in the region, including in the city of Richmond, representing Tallheimer, and has been one of those individuals who has led some projects that we read about regularly in the newspapers, really savvy, exciting project. And then last, but certainly not least, somebody who so everybody on the call recalls was extraordinary help to us because he's on the committee, specifically Mark Gans. And Mark is at Trustworth and has a lot of experience also here in the city in converting properties. And the 3 of them are going to provide a little more insight along with some recommendations and advice. But I think the way we're going to do this, Amelia, if you could key us off with tee us off with a little bit of information from your perspective about where the market is and where it's going.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak to the committee tonight, and Jonathan for having me. I am a senior project engineer with, or project manager rather, with Timmons Group and civil engineer. Do a lot of work in and for the city. And I would say right now we are seeing a lot of multifamily projects, lots of interest from affordable housing developers. And as Jason and Mark can probably share from their experience, being able to make all the math work and to get the financing structures that they need is really important. But we're also seeing a lot of market rate housing as well. So I think it'll be important to have the, as y'all develop the criteria for the RFP, to consider what you want, and then to understand what trade-offs you may need to make, and make those as active decisions to build the community fabric that you're looking for with these parcels. I would offer that. We're also seeing, continuing to see a lot of industrial activity and plans that we're looking at right now. There's maybe an inherent conflict with industrial uses adjacent to school uses that might not be the best match, even if something might work from an acreage or configuration land use perspective. And I think that we're of course not seeing a lot of office activity, but I don't expect that to totally go away as we move through the next few months of hopefully a vaccine and resolution through the pandemic. So I think there could be certainly creative office, co-working, nonprofit office type of redevelopment opportunities with some of these older buildings in particular.
Thank you, Amelia, and we'll come back to you, Jason.
Yep. Thanks for having me, Jonathan. I haven't met everyone on the phone here. My name's Jason Gio. I'm a principal with Tallheimer Realty Partners. We are a subsidiary of a small group, a subsidiary of Tallheimer, which is a brokerage and management company based in Short Pump. But I live in the city. I live on Willway Avenue by Mary Munford, and been in the city a long time. Love the city. I don't know much about education. I don't know much about schools. I could barely get my kids to listen to me, but I do know a lot about real estate. And when Jonathan reached out to Graker, I'm the incoming president of Graker, which is the Greater Richmond Association for Commercial Real Estate. And I saw what you guys were struggling with. I just felt obligated to join your call and try to help. I've personally led a lot of redevelopment of projects in the city. You guys may remember the West Hampton Theater. So I oversaw that. It was a struggle to get the neighbors on board with us, but I think we were successful, and most people are very happy with what's there today. That was, there were a lot of strong opinions on that property. So some of these properties I think you guys are discussing now, it sounds like there's a lot of strong opinions. The West Hampton School project, I oversee that personally. I'm responsible for everything outside of Bon Secours medical building. So I'm on site nearly every day of the week over there, overseeing construction. So if you want to talk about all the challenges renovating 100-year-old school buildings, give me a call. I'll tell you about it. So we've spent an extra $1 million that we did not budget on structural repairs to that building. I'll tell you, it was about to fall down. And we didn't know till we started pulling down the plaster that, because first we had to do the asbestos abatement in the building. We got that done. Then SB Cox was in there. We started pulling down plaster and the whole thing was about to come down. They evacuated the building and we had to go in and add shoring to it just to keep it in place. I see Amelia's eyes getting big. Yeah, it was that bad. So we've dealt with a lot of decrepit properties, but it looks fantastic now. The new windows are in and we're really excited about it. It's all going to be office space. And what's cool about it, we've got companies coming in from Henrico County and elsewhere that want to be in the city because they love this Midtown location. And actually property interest in it has gone up since COVID hit because people kind of like this neighborhood vibe, this Midtown location. We own some property across from the Arthur Ashe Center where the Richmond Ideal Lease Trucking Center is. And I was telling Jonathan earlier today, I was on the phone with our architects working on a redevelopment plan for that site. It's a big, ugly asphalt lot with box trucks on it. And we've got some good ideas of what to do there. So when we started talking about some of the properties you guys are working on, and some of the stuff we're working on, it just seemed to be a lot of paths that crossed. And I'm going to be a little long-winded here, but I really want to help you guys because while I'm in commercial real estate development, I see the success of Richmond Public Schools tied to economic development. All the companies that we talk to, they want to move to places where the schools are good, where their employees can send their children there. And so I'm your biggest champion, if you will. And so I'm willing to pledge some time to help you guys just on the side in any way I can to move the process forward. From what I witnessed from afar, it seems like the city can't get out of its own way when it comes to trying to dispose of some of this surplus property and put it on the tax rolls. Whether you guys monetize it through a land lease or an outright sale or a joint venture, I mean, there's all this equity that Richmond Public Schools and the city has just tied up in land that's not producing anything. And we can sit here and talk to each other till we're blue in the face about how to structure the RFP. And I'll be the one to say is I'm on the private sector. I'm used to efficiency. I'm not used to public processes. So I take that with a grain of salt, if you will. But I think at some point you just have to take a step forward, even if you're not sure it's the right step. And Ms. Berg, I appreciate your comments earlier. I think at some point you just have to act. I will tell you, I think GRTC did not do a good job with their RFP of the bus depot on Robinson Street several years ago. You may remember that. The RFP, I read it cover to cover. It was nebulous. It was confusing about how they were going to evaluate offers. You couldn't tell whether they wanted the highest price or they wanted certain uses. It was so confusing that the offers they got were all over the board and millions of dollars apart. And I think they left some money on the table as a result. So when you guys are prioritizing properties and thinking about what you want, if it's not just sales proceeds, you need to specifically list your priorities and talk about uses that you will allow and not allow. And those can be proffered conditions. One thing you should do if you want to get the highest dollar is rezone the property up front. Maybe the city can do that for you. Because if you guys try to sell a property that's zoned R residential for schools, the developer comes in and takes all of the risk that if they buy it, that they can ultimately build what they would like to build. And the value of the land is just a derivative of the future development, right? As well as the total cost of the project. So the more risk that you guys can remove from the equation for the developer means the more dollars you're going to get paid up front. Same thing with the land lease, really. And the nice thing with the land lease is you guys can take that revenue and then I assume the city could issue a bond and use that income as, essentially to service the debt of the bond. And so there are a lot of different ways you guys could approach stuff without giving up control. But I think the key is to start making some hard decisions and really putting some structure around this. But please don't put out a general RFP that's extremely vague and doesn't provide any specifics of what you want, because I think excuse my language, if you put out crap, you get crap back. And I think if you guys really take some authorship over this and tell the private sector what you want, you're going to get a really good response. One thing Jonathan and I were talking about earlier is if you want to tie the sale or the disposition of some of these properties to improving schools, maybe you guys could take some of your properties where you think they have residential or multifamily potential and tell the developer up front, we want 15% or 20% of your units to be designated for affordable housing for teachers first. And then you come out and say how much you want that rent to be. The more specific you are, if you say, I want the rent to be $300 a month or $500 a month, whatever it is, good or bad, high or low, at least people know what you want. And then those units could be reserved for teachers and part of the compensation package to recruit new talent to RPS. So these are, I think, any idea works. It's kind of in commercial real estate, it's the Wild West. It's not like residential. You can do whatever you want. You just have to make sure the market understands what you're looking for. So anyway, I've said my piece. I'll sign off and turn it over to Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. Mark?
Yeah, well, so first of all, I'm going to say, I guess when Jonathan, you asked me to be on this call, it was just to talk about the real estate market. I didn't really have much prepared as far as, like as much as Jason. He's a tough act to follow, but, my expertise is really single family houses. I mean, I do own a shopping center, small little strip mall, and a couple office buildings, but most of what I do is single family residential. And a lot of it's in the city, and I've done, tax credit renovations with those, but I also hold a lot of property as as a rental portfolio. But one thing I was just going to say, maybe that I can add to this that might be helpful to you all, is that I've been at this since 2004, 2003, 2004. I lived through the last real estate crash in 2008, survived it, got a t-shirt. But one thing I was going to say, though, is that today, I mean, I guess I could have said this last year, but even more so today, it feels a lot like 2006 all over again. And what I mean by that is that, it's like everybody seems to be running after real estate right now. And so if there was ever a time for you all to unload these properties in the city, it would probably be now would be a great time. I mean, I'm not trying to say time the market, but you couldn't, you could do worse if you didn't sell today. I mean, you absolutely want to try to make use of that. So, but let me see here. Did you have any questions specifically? Knowing my expertise is around single family houses, and I know I do have some multifamily, single family, residential, but I mean, does anybody have any specific questions for me that I can help answer?
Yeah, and let's open that up to all three of our experts. What questions do we have for Amelia, Jason, and Mark? Any questions for Amelia, Jason, Mark?
I don't have a question, but I have
Sure,
a comment.
Lisa.
I know
Yes,
I
ma'am.
didn't get to the chat. Great team. You pulled together 3 great people with different backgrounds, and I like the energy of each. And I'm thinking that by the end of 2021, we should have something concrete in place to move forward. So I'm very, very pleased. Mark brings his own vision. Jason brings his own expertise. Amelia brings hers as well. And then we have Paul here with us as well. Let's just do this. As Michelle stated, maybe we do need politically to start with the least interest site, which would be Oak Grove, Belmead. And as they were all speaking, I could see single family homes. I could see a strip mall. I could see a Starbucks coffee place. Wouldn't it be great if Holton Elementary had a 13-acre Starbucks? Because the parents always congregate there in the morning and after school. I mean, it's just, but instead they go to the on MacArthur Street. But it's so much that could be done, and I am in full agreement to have land just sitting there, and we need the money. We can't tax people to death and then some in the city of Richmond. We're sitting on the best we can at this time. Let's just do this, Jonathan. So Jonathan, you got 1 year to pull us together.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, well said. Yeah, the time is of essence, and Mark, thank you. Boy, I mean, let's not let the market turn and us be holding the bag on these properties. So to Paul's point a moment ago, Michelle, and now Cheryl, it seems to me. It seems to me that, I had on the agenda that we were going to assign properties, but it probably, given what Paul shared, it makes sense to start with those three properties. Would everybody around the call agree with that? If anybody'd like to weigh in and either agree or disagree, please.
Can I say something? So I think Mark has a really good point about, I mean, you can't time the market, but there is a tremendous amount of interest from out of town groups as well as in-town groups of being in the city. And a lot of that is driven by demographics. There are a lot of people, there's a net in migration to the city of Richmond right now. So people are following that and wanting to build housing, to accommodate it because there's money to be made. And so while it may feel right to dip your toe in the water and not take a huge risk by going with something smaller, you got to keep in mind that your more valuable properties, whatever they're worth, I mean, think about if you were to sell that or land lease it, what that annual benefit would be to RPS. You get that money sooner rather than later, especially in a good market. So don't be afraid of making a mistake. I really don't think you will.
Well, and I will add too, I think that these surplus school sites, they're some of the largest parcels we have in the city available. And so they represent an opportunity to be transformational in a neighborhood based on the size of some of these, if we do the right mix of uses with housing and maybe some supportive commercial or nonprofit uses on the site. We could even integrate parks. We're looking right now actively at, we have a committee internal with the city that meets every month about how we integrate parkland and park connectivity with affordable housing that we're developing. So we're looking at this all comprehensively, and the Oak Grove property is probably the one property that we could do the most on right now in terms of an RFP, because the site is so large, it could have a true mix of uses.
I want to keep us all honest here. We're almost at 7:00 p.m. and I promised that we'd get out of here by 7, but I don't want to adjourn before identifying next steps. And it seems to me the consensus is that let's take some risk here. Let's identify where we're going to prioritize a property. And it sounds like there's some consensus emerging around Oak Grove, Belmead. Thoughts, if anybody would care to weigh in regards to your 2 cents, what we should prioritize?
So I got a question for Paul. Does he still have that on RPS's inventory? Because I thought we initiated a quitclaim deed and that was turned back over to the city.
No, it has been turned back over to the city. So that's the one we could move fastest with, right, because we already own the property, all the property rights, or have all the property.
Good. Okay, that's good.
We don't have a quorum this evening to actually take a vote, but I think, Cheryl, it sounds like to me that the committee is prepared to recommend to the full board and to administration that we initiate partnership, collaborative partnership with the city to proceed on Oak Grove. Is that? Yeah,
but I have a question there regarding what Barbara just asked. if the city owns the property, technically, they don't have to give us anything from it because we've given it back to them. So if a building is built or whatever else, we have no say-so in that, correct? Is that right, Jonelle?
There isn't, well, as far as uses, I think that this is still an opportunity to establish, it sounds like the city will still have to do the RFP to, you know, and I'm sure would be some consultation there. But as far as proceeds, there is still an ordinance on the books, if I'm not mistaken, that if the property is sold, that those proceeds would return to the school. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Yes. And so for the Oak Grove property, while in theory, yes, the process would be the same for all, because you would still need to do the quit claim deed, which Moore Street is, you know, we've done that, but it still sounds like Paul is saying that the schools would have an opportunity to collaborate on uses, et cetera, for those properties.
Well, I think particularly the two sites that have active
Right.
schools adjoining them, we want your input. You
Right.
know? So,
Absolutely.
All right. Then next steps, Paul, we will identify who your principal point of contact will be as we build out that RFP process, and we'll start with Oak Grove, Belmead, and then transition to the two other properties there at Linwood Holton and at Carver, and to Jason's point a moment ago. We don't want to lose sight of the fact that we've got a big portfolio of some really important pieces of land all around town. We're a little after 7, but are there any questions for anybody on the call and or recommendations?
Yeah, I have just a thought about the Arthur Ashe. It seems to me like that might be good to unload sooner rather than later, because it gives a chance to have an RFP for the entire area, which is really beneficial for the city. And that could even be a revenue stream. Instead of someone paying for it, maybe they pay $700,000 a year, $1 million a year for maintenance. So it goes straight into the maintenance budget. But the other question is kind of for Paul and Mark, and it's about the 13-acre school that, Paul, I think that would be really helpful if there's a decision about where that property is cut, because the old school is a little close to the new school. The existing school would like to have a good amount of land, then it's easier to build an addition, like you could build, you know, 1-story stuff. But if you give more land with the property, it's more likely someone could save the building and, you know, come up with a better use for it, maybe sell it for a little bit more. But that would mean that the city, if they're going to add on to the building, they have to build a high quality urban style 2 to 3 story, you know. So either way, if it, you know, if the school really needs the property, then the old building is a little bit more at risk. But I think for, you know, what Jason was saying, that's a real risk for a developer. Like, you don't really know how you can get into park, and if the use is going to be a little too close to the school, you could move the building. I know, I think Mary Lorena worked on that a lot. It's very.
You're talking about on Moore Street?
No, I'm not talking about Moore.
Oh, okay, back on 13 acres, yeah.
Yeah, and that's as a frame building, it might be easier to move that to the corner of the site or move it off altogether.
And it sits far back off the road, so it needs to have a driveway into it that takes up a lot of land to get to it. That's the other issue. So,
right. Yeah, and I mean, a decision about that means a developer or a nonprofit can decide what to do. But if they have to argue about a road and worry about, you know, they have a small piece of land and it's mostly a road going in, it makes it. But I do kind of agree with Jason and what Cheryl is saying, that it does make sense some of the bigger properties to start doing something with those. Yeah, these little ones can be very difficult, and I'm horrified that the thing with VCU fell through, and that's tough.
Team, you have assisted us, and we just skipped a part of the process that we had been deliberating on for a while, and specifically metrics for prioritizing some of these buildings. I think that we're in a position now where it makes a lot of sense to proceed as identified earlier. We're going to adjourn the meeting this evening, but I would invite anyone, if you have any thoughts, any perspective, please follow up with me at your leisure. And thank you all.
Jonathan,
Yes, Cheryl.
Jonathan, when are we going to meet again? That would depend upon when Paul can get things straight for us. When are we going to meet? January, the end of January, 1st of February? When are we going to meet again? Can you give us a time frame, please? Thank you.
Yeah, great point. I would love to do it as soon as the middle of January. That would allow Cheryl, our new colleagues, to join the board. We can, at that first organizational meeting, we affirm who will be on the committees, and we could perhaps meet then as soon as middle of January. Maybe that third week of January. Is that what are everyone's thoughts? All
Does
right.
that give Paul enough time?
That's fine with me.
Okay. Let's plan on that third week of January. We'll identify some dates that work for everyone, and absent any other business for the evening, I wish everyone a good night.